All right. Good evening, everyone, and actually, good afternoon to those of you all on Pacific time. My name is Ed Recker. I am with Sallie Mae, and I'm very honored to be joining you this evening to talk to you about financial aid offers uh, in partnership with our friends here at NSHSS. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to get started. So before we get into kind of the details of the program, I did want to give a little introduction of myself. So again, my name's Ed Recker. I'm with Sallie Mae. I'm home based in Ohio, and I've worked in the financial aid field for over 20 years. So I've been doing this uh, mostly as a financial aid professional at a four-year public institution, a two-year public institution, as well as a four-year private institution in various roles in financial aid. And my last role was actually as a vice president for enrollment management at a private institution. I've been with Sallie Mae for about 5 years now, and I'm really passionate about helping folks navigate through the process of paying for college. A couple of housekeeping items here. I will have my eyes on the Q&A, so please feel free to drop questions in the question and answer at any point in time. I may answer them during the session. If not, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can after the formal presentation has concluded. So with that, let's dive right in. So uh, tonight I'm going to introduce you to the financial aid offer, what it is, key terms surrounding it, and how financial aid offers are determined, how to decode your offer, and things to consider moving forward. So, gang, I'll be honest with you, when we set this up, we had based this on a timeline that the US Department of Education had given everyone back in December. And at that point in time, we really felt strongly that, hey, we're going to have students will have some financial aid offers in their hands. So knowing what that timeline is now, we all know that most likely no one has financial aid offers in their hands at this point. But, with that being said, we are recording this session, so feel free to take notes, but if not, make sure you reference it at some point in time because we are going to go through this in pretty good detail and hopefully give you some great information along the way. So what is a financial aid offer? So after being accepted to college and completing the FAFSA, so the free application for federal student aid, you'll receive a notification that outlines how much the school will cost and what kind of financial aid you'll receive, including federal, state, and school sources. This notification is called a financial aid offer and are sometimes called financial aid awards or financial aid award letters. These all refer to the same thing. There isn't a standard format for the offer, so you'll need to read through each of these documents carefully. Financial aid offers may be delivered in several ways: postal mail, email, school portals via your student account, student access. So you do want to be checking all avenues. Don't just rely on checking your email or looking at your student portal or things like that. Make sure you're checking all of these. Also, remember that students receive the financial aid offer, not the parents. So you as the student, you're going to get this. It's not going to come to mom or dad. In addition, keep in mind that your financial aid will most likely be divided between fall and spring semesters if it's a semester system, or within by quarters. So usually fall, winter, spring if you're on a quarter system. The offer might not list the total cost of attendance, and we're going to go through what cost of attendance is in just a little bit. Cost of attendance may be provided as an estimate and there's sometimes a link to the school's website for additional information regarding costs. So you may also need to take action to accept any financial offers, such as accept it online, or you can also decline or modify parts of the offer, such as a loan. So there are a lot of different things that you can and can't do with a financial aid offer. So how exactly are offers determined? Well, it's a bit of a process. I'm going to be really honest with you. So first, To determine if a family is eligible for federal aid, they must complete the free application for federal student aid or the FAFSA at studentaid.gov. Families can start applying for next year as of October 1st. So actually, I'm going to pause. The FAFSA is open right now for students who are looking to attend college in the 24-25 academic year. For years after that, it'll be open on October 1st because we all know, hey, things didn't quite go as to plan this year. So we've endured some delays, but we do know that the FAFSA is indeed open right now. Also, keep in mind that some schools may require a supplemental application for institutional aid. So keep that in mind as well. Under normal circumstances, you can check the status of your FAFSA immediately. Keep in mind that only the student can do this because the FSA ID is required to log in. As of right now, if you log in to check the status of your FAFSA, it's just going to say it's in review. But we're going to go through some of those statuses right now to give you an idea that once they start processing, this is what it may look like or hopefully should look like. So first is the one that I had mentioned, in process. Right now, if you have submitted, it's probably going to say in process or in review. And under normal circumstances, it typically takes 3 to 5 days to process. But right now, the U.S. Department of Education is currently in a bit of a holding pattern, and they hope to start processing and have information to colleges and universities by mid-March. So again, if you log in right now, it's either going to say in process or in review if you've completed your FAFSA, and hopefully that'll start moving in mid-March, by mid-March. Another status would be processed successfully. This means it's complete and no further action is required from you. You may also see missing signatures. This application needs the required signatures in order to be processed. And a lot of that new FAFSA process should eliminate a lot of those missing signature errors. But again, keep that in mind if you do see that. And then the last one is action required. If you see this, you'll need to contact your school to resolve the issue. A lot of times folks will see that their FAFSA has been processed on the FAFSA website on studentaid.gov and think everything is completed, and that's not the case. The school then receives the FAFSA information from the Department of Education and, most importantly, the Student Aid Index Number, or SAI. They then subtract the SAI from the cost of attendance, or COA, to determine the student's financial need to help determine what types of aid and the amounts are to be included in the financial aid offer. Keep in mind that the financial aid offer takes into consideration several factors, including cost of attendance, family income, and family size. And we do have a question in here in the Q&A. Do you have to pay back the money you get from your financial aid? And we're going to answer that in just a little bit because it really depends on the types of aid that you're given. So we're going to touch on that in just a little bit. So moving on, we're going to cover some key financial terms. So financial aid folks tend to have a language of their own. And if you're ever speaking to anyone in financial aid, please don't hesitate to ask them to pause and explain any terms you may not be familiar with. And I already threw a couple of them out there for you all. It's second nature for us, but it may be the first time you're hearing it. So I'm going to practice what I preach, and let's talk a little bit more about cost of attendance, or COA. COA is the estimated cost to attend an institution for one academic year. So if we're talking semesters, we're going to go fall through spring. Depending on the student's enrollment status, it may include tuition and fees, books and supplies, food and housing, transportation, and personal expenses. Keep in mind that COA will vary from college to college, so it's going to be different at each college or university. And colleges will probably adjust the COA yearly to reflect changes to any of the elements that make up that cost of attendance. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the Student Aid Index Number, or SAI. And this is a measure of your family's financial strength and is calculated according to a formula established by law. The information from the FAFSA is used to calculate the SAI. Schools will use the SAI to determine the federal student aid eligibility and financial aid offer, and states and colleges will often use it for the same purpose as well. Also, your SAI isn't the amount of money your family will have to pay for college, and it isn't the amount of federal student aid you'll receive. Think of it more as a guidepost that helps schools determine what types and how much aid to offer you. Unlike cost of attendance, the SAI stays the same and does not change, regardless of what school receives it. So you could be looking at a 4-year private school, a 4-year public school, and a 2-year community or technical college. Even though all three of those schools will have different and potentially very different costs of attendance, the SAI will be the same regardless of the school. We've got a couple of other key terms I want to touch on that you may encounter in your journey. So the first one is special circumstances. Special circumstances. And this is largely what it sounds like. If your family encounters a financial crisis that is not reflected on the FAFSA, contact the financial aid office at each school you're considering. Examples of events that may be considered include loss of job, separation or divorce, death of a parent or spouse, or other extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. Each school could handle these situations differently, and they are not necessarily required to make adjustments. You may also see a note on your FAFSA submission summary indicating you've been selected for verification, or your school may notify you of this. This is a process that the school must go through to confirm the information on your FAFSA is accurate. Your school will notify you of the documentation you will need to submit. Please know that getting selected for verification doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. Some students are selected randomly, and some schools verify all students' information to ensure accuracy. So we've got a couple of other questions here. So what if the FAFSA says it's incomplete after applying? How do you know what is missing from the application? So as of right now, quite honestly, that's a good question. Because the Department of Education has not started processing just yet, there's really no way to be able to check what's missing from your FAFSA application. Once you hit submit, unfortunately, right now that record is locked. Once it becomes essentially unlocked, once they start processing, you will be able to go in and it will be able to help you understand what's missing, where the gaps are, so that you can complete it and then keep it moving. And then we have another question: can we still apply for any scholarships before we know our SAI? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We always encourage folks to continue to fill out scholarship applications, continue to pursue scholarships throughout the process. The only thing holding you back on scholarships really are those individual deadlines and, quite frankly, yourself. So we always encourage folks continue to search for scholarships, keep applying for scholarships throughout the process. And we've got one last question before we move on. Why does the new FAFSA not show the actual figures that are retrieved using the IRS retrieval tool like the old FAFSA did? Now, that's a really good question. And the answer to that one is, quite frankly, it was intentionally done so that the information was being pulled in, what I always like to say, behind the scenes. The reason being, a couple of different reasons for that. One, it's about security and personal security. So by not displaying it, it ensures a little more safety, a layer of safety. It also allows for that information to be pristine. And we talked about verification. So in the past, you could pull that information over, but you could actually edit or alter it. And it really made life a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. Once it comes over from the IRS, they know it's good, they being the US Department of Education, they being the schools. So by doing it behind the scenes, kind of keeping it sight unseen, then everybody knows it's pristine. And at that point, it really eliminates the school or the Department of Ed's reasoning for selecting anyone for verification for financial purposes. And then the last piece of that puzzle really is if there are circumstances where students may not want their parents to know what their financial situation is, and vice versa. By essentially keeping it behind that firewall, behind that screen, that eliminates a lot of that concern and a lot of that really confusion when it comes to students and families saying, "I'm not sure I want to submit my FAFSA," especially from a parent perspective. I don't want to submit or help my student out because I don't want them to see my financials. By doing this, it absolutely eliminates that argument. The student will never see the parent's financials and vice versa. And gang, I know we've got more questions coming in. I promise you I will answer them, but we're gonna keep going through the formal presentation as well. So some key tips when submitting the FAFSA. So again, FAFSA stands for free application for federal student aid, and it's really that first step in applying for federal, state, and institutional aid. It's perhaps the most important form you'll fill out to determine your financial aid eligibility. If you have not completed the FAFSA for the upcoming school year, you'll want to do so as soon as possible, as many schools do have priority deadline dates. And gang, I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, well, Ed, you just told us that they're not processing anything until mid-March. Why do we need to fill anything out if we know nothing's going to happen until mid-March? Well, one of the big reasons for that is even when you fill out the FAFSA right now, even though it's not being processed, your submission is being date and time stamped. So once the schools do know, once they get that information, they will know when you did it. And as we know, some aid is given out on a first come, first served basis. So even though they may be getting all sorts of FAFSAs at the same time, they're going to know who did it first. So keep that in mind. And that's, again, why we always encourage folks to make sure that they're filling out the FAFSA as soon as possible, hitting those priority deadlines, and getting first in line for some of that free money. So, and as I had just said, some of the awards are on a first come, first served basis. So it is important to do it as early as possible. Also, don't assume that you aren't eligible for aid because your family's income is too high, because almost every student is eligible for some form of financial aid. And we're going to go through some of those in just a bit. One other thing to note is that financial aid deadlines are not the same as college admission deadlines. So we would encourage you to check with both offices, so financial aid office and the admissions office, for any important deadlines you may need to be aware of. So I'm going to hit on a couple of other questions here. So does the SAI stay the same all 4 years, or if the parents receive raises or bonuses after their first year, then the student aid index could go up each year? And the answer to that is yes. So the SAI does get recalculated each year. The FAFSA needs to be completed each year. So every year they take in new information and they're going to recalculate it. And then it looks like potentially a follow-up question to that. What figures do they retrieve from the taxes other than AGI, number of dependents? It feels like we are completely in the dark. So this is where I would actually encourage you to, there are ways to check that out. So I think the easiest way to do it is if you just go to Google and Google paper FAFSA 2024-25, it'll actually give you the paper form, a PDF form of the FAFSA, and it'll show you all of the financial aid the financial information that's being pulled over from the IRS. So gang, I can tell you that the intention here really isn't to keep folks in the dark. It's really to help expedite the process, make it easier, cut down on a lot of the confusion that folks have historically had when completing the FAFSA. So another question we have is, do you have to apply for FAFSA each year of college or just the year before college starts? And the answer is we strongly encourage you to fill it out every year because really the FAFSA is only good for that 1 year. You have to think of it as a renewal application thereafter. So lots of good questions, gang. This is fantastic. So we're going to talk a little bit about applying for institutional aid, which is aid that is specific to a college or university that college or university is extending to students. So depending on your school, you may need to complete additional steps. So it's important to check on your school's website for information. Some schools may require the College Board's CSS profile for institutional aid, and it's required by more than 200 colleges and universities to award non-federal aid. So for these schools, the CSS profile is an addition to the FAFSA. So it does not replace the FAFSA. I've said in the past, think of it as an and, not an or. You can't just do, if the school requires the CSS profile, you can't just do the CSS profile and not the FAFSA if you want to really maximize your aid. And you can't complete the FAFSA only and have that in place of the CSS profile. So again, it's an and, it's not an or. Also, similar to the FAFSA, the CSS profile is available on October 1st of each year. And although there is a charge to complete the CSS profile, fee waivers may be available depending on need. So I've talked about cost of attendance, COA, and student aid index number, or SAI, but how do these work together? So the college subtracts your SAI from the COA, so basically that formula that's up on the screen, to calculate how much need-based federal aid you may be eligible for. So what that does is that actually calculates financial need, and that helps a school determine what types of aid you're eligible for. So remember, your SAI does not vary by college, but the amount of aid your family is eligible to receive will vary by college based on each school's evaluation and based on this formula. Because again, cost of attendance is going to change from school to school. So that financial need number is going to move. It's going to change depending on the school. So what this ultimately means is that you can and probably will have different financial need at different schools. This is because cost of attendance at various schools is going to be different, as I just said. So with that being said, your SAI will not change from school to school. That number is determined by completing the FAFSA based on that federal formula. And also remember, the SAI is the same whether you attend a 2-year college, a 4-year public university, or a 4-year private university. So that one stays the same no matter what school or what type of school you'll be attending. All right, so we're going to keep moving on, and here's a sample of a financial aid offer that we're going to break down in the upcoming slides. So schools will, again, they'll refer to these as financial aid awards or financial aid letters. Just know that this is the same as a financial aid offer. Also, keep in mind that there is currently no standard format, and the one that we're going to be using tonight, this is a pretty basic example. A lot of schools will have it branded with their school logo and colors, and a lot of schools will have this set up as even like a 2 to 4 page booklet. With that being said, there should be some common elements throughout. So one of them is how much 1 year of college will cost. So again, this is that cost of attendance, or COA. This can be a little tricky and something we're going to cover in a bit more detail in an upcoming slide. We're really going to break it down. The financial aid offer is also going to include the financial aid the school is offering. The hope is that the school separates the aid into sections similar to what we have on the screen, as there's a big difference in free money, earned money, and borrowed money. And we're going to go through each one of those categories again in just a little bit. And then also, hopefully, it'll have any remaining balance, or sometimes they'll refer to it as a gap or out of pocket, that will need to be covered through other sources. Another thing to look for is that some schools will count all aid toward covering any remaining balance. Although all aid can be used to cover a remaining balance, it's up to you and your family as to whether a certain type of aid should be used to cover a remaining balance. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. The way a college or university presents the information could be confusing to some. But as we break the example offered down, we'll help you identify key things like how to calculate net cost, and what options are out there to cover any remaining balance or gap. We've got another question come in. I'm seeing here, why are some schools requesting 1040 and all schedules now? Why is it not retrieved from the FAFSA? So that's a really good question. I'm not sure that I have a concrete answer for that. What I'm guessing is going on is that schools are trying to actually get a little bit ahead of the FAFSA and the U.S. Department of Education. What they're trying to do, from my perspective, is they're probably actually trying to replicate the FAFSA in-house. They want to get you information more quickly than waiting on the FAFSA. So most likely they're asking for that information because they're trying to help get you your award offer sooner rather than later so that you can have a better understanding of what your aid package will be, what your costs will be, and ideally help you make an informed decision. So quite honestly, it's hard to say exactly why, but if I were putting on my financial aid director hat again, that's where my head would go. So we've got a couple more here before I move on. So when schools talk about their cost of attendance, does it usually refer to only one semester and not a full year? So that's a great question. And normally, when we start talking about cost of attendance, it is supposed to be for the entire academic year. So that would be if we're talking semesters, 2 semesters, 3 quarters, and so forth. And then the last question before I move on, what happens if you accidentally put incorrect info in the FAFSA? So I think I'm not sure that I can really give a concrete answer to that. I think it really depends on what that incorrect information is. So as of right now, you can't make corrections. But once they start processing, and remember, once your status changes from in review or in process to processed, you can always go back into the FAFSA and make updates and make changes. So keep that in mind as well. If you accidentally gave a incorrect answer, you can always go back in and change it. So nothing that is done can't be undone or fixed. So good questions, gang. Really good questions. So moving forward, we have some helpful tips for you on the screen. And to make the comparison a little easier, we strongly encourage creating a spreadsheet or using a free online comparison tool to review the financial aid offers that you've received due to there not being a standard format. So gang, again, a simple spreadsheet, or even if you just go on Google and say financial aid offer comparison worksheet or something like that, tool, resource, you're going to see a list of resources. They should all be free. They should all be very easy to access so that you should be able to just, quite frankly, plug and play. Put the information in there and it'll help you sort through and make that good informed decision. But if you want to do it on your own via a spreadsheet, you want to first try to identify what aid is gift aid, which is aid you won't have to pay back, and what aid you will have to pay back, which is borrowed aid, and what aid you'll earn. You'll also want to find your out-of-pocket costs to attend. So hopefully, and again, this is COA, hopefully schools will clearly have your cost of attendance listed, but if not, add up your total college costs, tuition, fees, food and housing, transportation, books, and personal expenses. Once you have your COA, subtract your total grants and scholarships, so that's your free money, sometimes called gift aid as well. Another good tip would be to check if these are renewable yearly, so you would have an idea of what your out-of-pocket will be for future years as well. From there, you subtract your gift aid, so again, scholarships and grants, from your cost of attendance, and that's what you'll need to pay for one college year. Once you get to this point, you'll be able to do what we would just call an apples to apples comparison of the offers you'll receive from multiple schools. So the last step, and I know you're looking at this and you're saying, boy, Ed, the last step is make your decision. But I don't want you to misrepresent that to mean that the school with the lowest out-of-pocket expense is the school you should go to. Although out-of-pocket expense is definitely important, it's not the only factor in deciding where to go to school. We always encourage students to discuss their options with the key people in their lives and weigh all factors in addition to costs, like the type of school, location, and academic programs before making a decision on where to attend. Lastly, please remember that you as the student will receive the financial aid offer, not the parent. So I'm going to go back to one of our earlier questions that I said we would cover. And it was, do you have to pay back the money you get from financial aid? So I said it depends, and we kind of covered some of those in this slide. So we talked a lot about gift aid, which are scholarships and grants. That is not money you have to pay back. If it says it's a scholarship, if it says it's a grant, that's gift aid. That's free money. You do not have to pay it back. If it's something that is a loan, so anything that says loan, and we're going to cover the types of loans a little later in the presentation, those are funds you're going to have to pay back. And I know there's a lot of buzz about student loan forgiveness and things of that nature right now. And gang, I'll be honest, some of it's legit, but I always tell folks, go into it. If you're taking out a loan, go into it thinking that you're going to have to pay it back. If you don't have to pay it back, fantastic. That's amazing. But always go into it with the expectation that, hey, I'm going to have to pay this back. And then the last type of aid is what we would call earned aid or work-based aid. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But again, it's exactly what it sounds like. You have to work for it, usually through a part-time job. So let me see here. So I've got a question here. We submitted the application with my son's signature and didn't get to put the parent's signature. Will it still get processed? It just depends, and I apologize. I may not be able to answer that one. That's a really specific situation where we'd have to really kind of dig into it individually. So I apologize. I don't know that I can actually answer that. I think the best thing that I could say is, wait until the Department of Ed starts processing. And at that point, it should tell you what the status of that FAFSA is. If for some reason the parent signature did not take, you can always go back in and sign it. So next question is FAFSA only for individuals that are citizens of Texas, or is it both for citizens and non-citizens? Also, what's the difference between TASFA and FAFSA? So, gang, I'm going to be honest. I'm not a resident of Texas, and I don't know a lot about the Texas system. I can tell you that FAFSA is, I mean, that's nationwide. That's something that everyone across the U.S. can leverage in order to be eligible for federal aid. The student must be a citizen. The parents can be a non-citizen, but the student must be a citizen or an eligible non-citizen. So essentially a green card holder in order to be eligible for federal aid. So next question is, in the FAFSA application, there's a box that says you can check if someone in the family is receiving SSI. What about SSDI? Should the SSI box still be checked if the family member is receiving SSDI? I'm going to be honest, I'm not familiar with, I believe it's Social Security disability. So I would, quite frankly, I would just stick to what it's asking. So if it's only asking for SSI, it's not asking for SSDI, I would not check that box. So keep that in mind as well. Can you choose to not accept the loan portion, but accept the remainder of the offer? We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but the short answer is yes. So I'm going to give you the short answer, and we're going to keep moving forward. Again, great questions, gang. Y'all are doing fantastic here. So as we discussed, a key part of comparing aid offers is determining what the cost of attendance, again, or COA is. I know y'all are probably like, oh my gosh, Ed, we're so sick of hearing about COA. But I'm telling you, it's so critically important when we start doing these comparisons and these apples to apples. So some schools will have it clearly spelled out, as well as all the corresponding elements on the award offer. And we have that laid out on ours. Unfortunately, some schools exclude some or all cost of attendance information. However, you should be able to obtain it one of multiple ways. Most schools will have the information posted on their website, and actually they're required to have it posted on their website. So if nothing else, you'll always be able to find it on the website. Um, and that'll either be on their financial aid page or their student accounts page, sometimes called cashier's office or bursar's office. You're going to be able to find it in any one of those elements. If you'd like the more direct, or if you do like the more direct approach, you can always just call or email the financial aid office at the school. They'll be able to point you in the right direction or potentially just get it to you right there on the spot. Although some of the schools may not have all of their costs set just yet, they should be able to give you a very good estimate on each of those elements. And gang, I can tell you that's a real thing. The state institution I worked at, the board of trustees did not set the tuition until June or July. So we always had financial aid offers out well before the actual costs were set, but we were able to give them a really good estimate each year. So we've got a question here. Is financial aid awarded separately each academic year? So I'm going to interpret that as do I get a different award each year? And the answer is potentially. So again, you have to fill out the FAFSA each year. There are some elements of that financial aid offer that may stay the same. So if you get some institutional aid or you've got a renewable scholarship, there's a good chance that those will stay the same each year. But each year, things like federal aid, there's a chance that they'll change because again, federal aid, it's going to be based partially off of that SAI. SAI can change each year. So it really just depends on that. So, you'll also find, unfortunately, in financial aid, a lot of the answers are, it depends. So I apologize, gang. I wish I could give you more concrete, but a lot of times it does just depend. So we've got another question here. Will all offers include room and board, even if you plan to commute? So you could subtract that from the remaining balance. So that's a really good question. And again, I know it sounds silly. It depends. This is where we really encourage you as the student. And this is one of those changes in the FAFSA. And I know this isn't a FAFSA webinar, but there's a lot of overlap. One of the changes in the FAFSA is it used to ask you where you planned on living, on campus, off campus, commuting with parent, things like that. The FAFSA no longer asks that question. So we encourage you as the student to reach out to the financial aid office, the admissions office, heck, maybe even student housing, and let them know what your housing intentions are. So if you do plan on commuting, once you get that award offer, it won't even show that on-campus housing cost or estimate, things like that. So hopefully that helps there. And last question before we move in, can tuition be locked in for all 4 years, or does tuition and expenses go up each year? So again, I hate to say it, gang, it depends. And this one really depends on the institution. So some schools will lock in tuition for 4 years. Some, it's going to change each year throughout. It really just depends. So that's a great question to ask the college or university that you're applying to. They'll definitely be able to answer that question for you. I will tell you when it comes to some of the other expenses. So when we start talking about food and housing, books and supplies, oftentimes those are going to vary even amongst students in the same class, freshman class, because if I'm an engineering student, as an example, my books are most likely going to be more expensive than an English lit major. Someone's buying highly technical textbooks that are this thick, that probably cost $500 to $600 a pop, maybe more, to maybe a student who's buying, a half a dozen paperback novels or something of that nature. So keep in mind, some of these are going to be estimates. The Department of Ed requires them to make those estimates, but they're also required to be good faith estimates. So again, I apologize. It depends, but hopefully I'm providing you with enough framework so that you kind of get the gist of it. So, all right. So we talked a little bit earlier about gift aid or grants and scholarships. And the reason we call it gift aid is that it's free money that does not need to be paid back. Grants, which do not require repayment, are typically awarded annually based on information provided on the FAFSA. They're offered by numerous sources, such as federal and state governments, colleges, and independent organizations. Although numerous grants are state and school specific, there are two major federal grants that I'm going to touch on here. So the federal Pell Grant and the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG. The federal Pell Grant is a need-based grant. So again, it's based off of that SAI number with awards, at least for this year, up to $7,395. And those are awarded to those who qualify. And gang, that number will most likely go up for this upcoming year, but the Department of Education has not released that figure as of yet. FSEOG, sometimes also called SEOG, those awards are granted to students with exceptional financial need. And these awards can range anywhere from $100 to $4,000. And gang, I can tell you that these are awarded on a first come, first served basis. And this is always a big reason why we encourage students to file the FAFSA early. That'll help ensure that a student will get some FSEOG if they qualify. We have a state grant listed here on our sample, but state grants can be a little tricky because the criteria and process, it's going to vary from state to state. However, generally speaking, states do have a deadline, so make sure to check with your state Department of Education website for details. Also, most states use the FAFSA to determine eligibility, but I encourage you to check with your state Department of Education again in that website to see if they require a separate application. So we've got a couple of other questions pop up here. Is a state grant based on the state that you live in or the state of the college you choose is in? Based on my experience, it is most often the state you live in. And oftentimes you have to be a resident of that state and be attending college in that state in order to be eligible. Now, there are some exceptions, and gang, I'm going to speak to the ones I know. Again, I'm located in Ohio. Some states do have state reciprocity with other states where a resident of one state can actually go to school in another state and still receive some state grant money. The example I use in Ohio is we have reciprocity with the state of Pennsylvania. So if a Pennsylvania resident comes to Ohio for college, they can receive, it's called, I can't even tell you what the acronym stands for, but it's the PHEAA grant. So PHEAA, I believe, grant. So that's an example. Again, I would ask that question of your state Department of Education, or potentially even the college or university you're interested in. Hey, I'm a resident of this state. I'm going to be coming to your school. Would I be eligible for whatever our state, the state you live in, their state grant, or vice versa? So good question. And the second one, does a second child have discounts on their tuition and fees? So, I think there are a couple layers to that question. I think what you're probably asking is, does the SAI calculation take into consideration multiple children in college at the same time? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no, it does not. So in the past, they did. That was one of the changes made by Congress with the new legislation that multiple children were no longer taken into consideration. Multiple children in college were no longer taken into consideration in the new formula. Now, with that being said, I always encourage folks, reach out to the college or university and see if they may have additional grants or scholarships that they're willing to extend to folks who have multiple children in college at the same time. So good questions, really good questions, gang. So moving on, after you determine the net cost, so that's what we just talked about, or in our example, the school gives you that net cost, which would really be ideal. It'll start to present options on how to pay any remaining balance. One of those options may be federal work study, a need-based federal aid program. Although not listed on our example, some schools may also offer their own work programs. So we've outlined some of the details regarding work programs on this slide, But some of the key points you may want to consider is that hours will vary when we talk about hours, work hours for these positions, and may sometimes be limited based on the position. A position can be tied to your academic major, but it doesn't have to be. And you receive a paycheck for the hours you work. The funds are paid out over time based on your hourly rate and the number of hours you work. So, really, in summary, it's a lot like any other job. You need to work to get paid, and the funds are paid to you directly and not applied to your bill. So again, that's a big difference, gang. That's something to keep in mind because when we look at most financial aid offers, uh, oftentimes it represents it as aid, which it is, but it also subtracts it from your cost of attendance, which it can, but there are a lot of steps to go through here. So so keep that in mind. You aren't expected to work if you're awarded some type of employment option. So don't think of this as a contract, like you have to work if you're extended some type of work study option. But they are giving you the option to earn extra money while you're enrolled. Obviously, work is not free money, but it doesn't have to be repaid. So keep that in mind as well. We consider this self-help aid, and because it's paid to the student directly as a paycheck, again, I know I'm banging that drum, but gang, I'm going to keep doing it. It typically is used to cover indirect costs, so costs that aren't billed directly to you. Things like books, transportation, or other miscellaneous expenses. Also, if you decide to participate in a work program, make sure you find out if the school will assign you a position or if you have to find your own. As previously mentioned, and I know, third time's the charm. Keep in mind that these funds are paid out via a paycheck and are not automatically applied to your bill. You have to earn the funds over time. And I see that we've got some more questions popping in the Q&A, so I'm going to pause and take a look at those. So if you were a twin and both are going to college at the same time, would that affect the financial aid given? So again, I'm going to go back to my previous answer where the U.S. Department of Education via Congress no longer has the number in college factored into the formula. So if there are twins, you're both going to college, it's really going to depend on that college and university. And I would make sure to bring that to their attention because they may have something out there for you, but it's not going to be an automatic. It's no longer in that formula. It's not going to be something like in the past where it was calculated into the federal formula where number of students in college at the same time was a factor. So next question is, when answering how many children in the family are attending college, does a sibling who is older and married count with the child leaving high school? So the answer to that question is, the intent of that question really is uh, is the sibling that you're naming, is that sibling what would be considered a dependent of yours as a parent? So to answer that question, if the sibling is not, then you should not include them. Now, I'm going to go back to my previous answer though, and this is, gang, I will say this, I don't know why they even have this question on the FAFSA. The FAFSA still asks how many in the family are going to college. I refer to this as a road to nowhere because it has been taken out of the federal formula. It really doesn't have any bearing on the types or amount of aid that will be extended to the student. The only potential reason for having that on the FAFSA is so that the college or university can see it, and maybe they can make some type of concessions for you. But beyond that, it does not impact the formula whatsoever. So next question, can you reject work study without losing other aid? And the answer is yes. Work study is one of those that most schools, if you're eligible, they will extend it to you, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it. You can decline it and you can just move on from it. So it's not, unless the school explicitly says you have to work, which I know there are a handful of those in the nation, but again, it's really the option of the student. And for those schools, For the most part, they make that known right away and upfront. So, last question before I moved on. Are kids penalized, or is it tracked whether kids do or do not meet all of their work study funds? I'm not sure that I fully understand that question. So, they're not penalized in any way. So, if a student wants to leverage work study, they can. If they or if they choose to work on campus via a work study job and they just don't earn all of those funds, it absolutely does not hurt them whatsoever. I think the only, and actually there are a lot of benefits to a federal work study. So at least from a FAFSA perspective, it when reporting income, it does not count as an income on the FAFSA. So another good thing about federal work study. So all right, gang, I'm going to keep moving. I know we had a couple pop in, but we're going to keep moving and I'm going to catch those after the next slide, okay? So the next option for paying for any remaining balance are federal student loans. These loans are provided by the government and must be paid back with interest. So there are two types of federal student loans for undergraduate students: federal direct subsidized loans and federal direct unsubsidized loans. The borrower is not billed interest for a federal direct subsidized loan during the in-school period or grace period or a post-school deferment. In federal direct unsubsidized loans, the borrower is responsible for paying the interest during the in-school period or grace or a post-school deferment. Also, some schools may include the federal Parent Plus loan in this section. And gang, I cannot stress this enough. This is not a student loan. It is a loan. It is for parents, but it is not a student loan. Uh, the loan is solely in the parent's name and has very different rates, fees, and features. So you'll want to pay close attention to this and note it within your comparison. So keep that in mind. And we're going to talk more about federal Parent Plus loans in just a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to answer some questions. So one of the questions we have is, can you negotiate financial aid packages with colleges? So I'll be honest, I think negotiate's a really strong term. And personally, I don't like to use it. I think you can have a conversation with the school. I think a lot of schools have appeals processes or a special circumstances process where request or talk to them about additional aid options, receiving additional aid. But I don't necessarily like negotiate, quite frankly, because I don't feel like a college education is like a used car. And I apologize if I offend anyone with that. I'm not saying you can't ask, but I think, again, negotiate makes it sound like, it's this haggle back and forth. And I don't think that's the case. And I'll tell you what, as a I still consider myself a financial aid professional. I was always happy to have the conversation, but I really didn't like it when people would like push an award offer back to me and kind of say, we'd love to come here, but we really need an extra $5,000 or something like that. I mean, it's just, yeah, in my opinion, it's just bad taste, but that's just me. So, next question is, if the parent has earned college funding through military service, veteran affairs, and can pass on to their children, is this accepted by all colleges? So generally speaking, I would say yes. But again, I think that's a conversation you need to have with each college or university. So my guess is that this is the post 9/11 GI Bill. For the most part, I would say that probably 99%, if not more, colleges and universities will accept the post 9/11 GI Bill. This may be a little bit of a different process, though. So you may want to find the person on campus or persons on campus who deal with this. So it could be in the financial aid office, but there's oftentimes what's called a VA certifying official on campus, and they'll be the ones to talk to as well. And then the last question before we move on, can you repay a direct subsidized loan post-graduation with proceeds remaining in a 529 plan? So gang, we're going to talk about 529s in just a little bit. But there is, to answer this question, the answer is yes. So new regulations have come through that have said that a 529 college savings plan can pay up to $10,000 in federal student loans. So keep that in mind. If you have a 529 and you want that to be used to pay for some federal student loans, possibly after the fact. Then at that point, it can be. All right, so we've got another question pop in. I'm going to hold that one until after our next slide because we're going to talk a little bit more about federal student loans. So people often ask if they can borrow as much as they need when it comes to federal student loans. And unfortunately, that answer is no. The U.S. Department of Education has annual and aggregate limits on how much you can borrow through these programs. And we've got them listed on the screen there. But for an undergraduate student, the most that they can borrow is $31,000, and only up to $23,000 of that can be a subsidized loan. If you're a graduate student, that number goes up substantially. So $138,500 combined between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, if you're a graduate student. Also, keep in mind that borrowers are charged an origination fee, and you'll see that in the box up in the corner of the screen there. These fees are subtracted from the loan prior to disbursement. However, the borrower will have to pay back the entire loan amount, including that origination fee. Schools receive the loan proceeds minus the origination fee, so the borrower does not need so the borrower does not get the full amount that they borrowed. So if we're doing simple math and we use kind of an example of student borrows $10,000, the origination fee is just over 1% there. So in this case, if a student borrows $10,000, 1%, they're going to receive $10,000 minus $105. So what is that? $895, I believe, if my shoestring math is correct there. So keep that in mind. If you're borrowing using a federal loan, they are going to have origination fees. But federal loans do have some benefits. So borrowers are afforded 1 6-month grace period. Interest accrues through the grace period and is capitalized at the end of grace for an unsubsidized loan. Borrowers can pay the interest at any time on an unsubsidized loan until the end of the grace period and avoid interest capitalization. Now, interest capitalization that's an industry term, it's a banking term, but essentially what it is it's taking any interest that's accrued on the loan and it rolls it back into the loan. And then they charge you interest on your interest. So, gang, I'm telling you, it's not the end of the world. But if you can pay that interest while you're in school or at the end of each academic year, you're going to be much better off. There are also various repayment periods for federal student loans, anywhere from 10 to 25 years. And there are also various deferment options. So in school, as long as you're in school, you don't have to make payments. Economic hardship, military, etc. And it really just depends on your situation. So we've got a couple other questions that came in. If a 529 plan is owned by grandparents with the student as the beneficiary, will this affect the FAFSA in 2025? And the answer to that is no. So this was a change where in the past it was basically whoever was the beneficiary, they had to have that information reported on the FAFSA. Now it's only if the account owner resides in the household. So if it's a parent or the student are the account holders, it has to be reported. If it's someone outside of the household, so grandparent, aunt, uncle, you don't have to report it. So good question. Can you apply for scholarships apart from FAFSA every year? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. To me, applying for scholarships, that's an ongoing thing. Like I wish folks would treat that almost like a part-time job. You can continue to look, you can continue to apply pretty much year-round throughout your entire college career. So keep that in mind, that the search for scholarships, really, quite honestly, it never ends. Good stuff, gang. So This slide illustrates the difference between the cost of attendance minus gift aid, so scholarships and grants, and the financial aid awarded. So, again, the work programs and federal student loans. Keep in mind that there are a number of different ways you can cover this gap. Some options are outside scholarships, savings, tuition payment plans, private student loans, Parent Plus loans, and private parent loans. Before we talk about those options, I want to point out that some offers may show a zero balance, and that's with all of the work and loan options. Although this may indeed be the case, we really encourage you to look closely and see what aid is included to get you to that zero balance. So oftentimes, uh, there are schools that will package a federal Parent Plus loan or a private loan to cover any gap. Please be aware of what aid is being offered to get to that zero balance, as it can be misleading. So we've got another question in the chat. Can you send a single payment before your loan repayment begins to cover the accrued interest? Can you make a payment to be applied to reduce principal like a mortgage? The answer to both of those is yes. So the interest on any loan does not capitalize until after that grace period. So it'll sit there and it will continue to accrue, but it won't actually get rolled back in until at the end of that grace period. So you could feasibly let it continue to build up throughout undergrad. And then at the end of undergrad, you're like, all right, I'm going to pay off all the interest. So that way I'm kind of starting from scratch. Or as you had said, you can also send in a big lump sum payment and say, hey, I want it applied to principal. And you can absolutely do that as well. So good question. All right. So I mentioned these on the previous slide, so I wanted to give a little more information about some of the various ways to cover our remaining balance. We're going to start with free money first, and in this case, that's outside scholarships. And I know we've talked a lot about scholarships already. Outside scholarships are free money awarded by an outside party and can be based on things like academic achievement, financial need, community involvement, organization membership, sports, talent or skill, leadership or school activities, ethnicity, religious affiliation, parent affiliation with work, club, or activity. I mean, gang, that was a big list, and we're just scratching the surface there. Students do need to make sure to ask their school how to apply outside scholarships. Will it be added on, or will it reduce their own financial aid? So keep that in mind, and schools will do that kind of on a case-by-case basis, depending on what their rules and regulations are. So it's a good thing to ask those questions. High school counselors are always a fantastic scholarship resource as well, as they usually have a great number of local and regional scholarships for you to review. We also recommend scholarship search engines, which can be found online as well. Other options include college or other savings plans like 529 plans. So we talked a little bit about that earlier, or a Coverdell savings account, or other savings earmarked for college expenses. So 529 plans and Coverdell savings accounts are money saved that can be used for any qualified higher education expense. And that includes tuition and fees, but also certain food and housing costs. Earnings grow tax deferred and are free from federal income tax when used for qualified higher education expenses in those accounts. With that being said, we encourage you to please consult with a tax advisor regarding these types of accounts. I am not an accountant. I am not a money professional per se. So we do recommend that you reach out to those folks about those. So two other options available to cover remaining balances are tuition payment plans, as well as private and federal Parent Plus loans. We're going to go into a more detail on each of these options in just a little bit. But before then, we've got a couple more questions. Do parents have the option to pay monthly for tuition, or is the tuition due before each semester or quarter? And actually, we're going to talk about that in the next slide, so I'm going to hold off on that one. And then the next question is, you don't have to repay interest on subsidized loan, right? Now, I want to make a specific distinction here. Subsidized loans don't have interest while the student is in school and during their post-deferment grace period. Once they exit school and they leave their grace period, the interest does start on that loan. The big difference and the big benefit is that if we use round numbers, if a student borrows $5,000 in a subsidized loan, they leave school 6 months after the repayment starts, they still only owe $5,000. That's not the case with an unsubsidized loan. But once with that subsidized loan, once you're after that grace period, the interest does start to accrue. All right. So we've got that question about tuition payment plans. It was almost like it was a planted question, and it absolutely was not. Um, so schools themselves will often offer tuition payment plans to help cover any remaining balance. These plans allow you to spread your payment out over time, typically a semester or an academic year. So they do allow, oftentimes they will allow a student to pay, or a family to pay for a semester over that semester, or if it's for the entire academic year, over that entire academic year. These plans, and we do make sure that you ask the question because sometimes these plans may have fees or interest charges that will vary by school. So check with your school regarding their particular plans. For parents, keep in mind that you may have costs today while your student is at home or in high school that you can allocate towards college costs. Think about costs associated with sports or extracurricular activities that you can allocate towards college. Plans typically allow you to make monthly payments over a number of months, and again, that's determined by the school, rather than make a lump sum payment. There is typically a fee, which I had mentioned. So sometimes we get a question if it's an option to maybe kind of split it up, pay part of it in cash, pay part of it with a payment plan, or maybe even do partial payment plan and then take out like a private loan or a federal parent plus loan. And the answer is yes. Generally speaking, you can do that, but you'll want to coordinate something like that with the school's financial aid office and their student accounts office. They'll most likely want the loan approved and in place before the payment plan so that they can accurately calculate the payment. So I'm going to go back to that previous question. Do parents have the option to pay monthly for tuition, or is the tuition due before each semester or quarter? And the answer to both is yes. So you definitely have the option for I would say the vast, vast majority of schools, you can pay monthly throughout that quarter or that semester, or you can make that lump sum payment upfront. Either way is acceptable for the vast majority of schools. I think the biggest thing is you just need to communicate how you're going to do that and how you're going to proceed to make sure that everybody's on the same page. All right, we're going to keep moving on here. So I mentioned it a couple times. So we want to discuss loan options available to students and parents to cover that remaining balance. And we've got the three major ones here that are kind of outside of that federal student loan scope. So private student loans, and we're going to start there, are a loan where the student is the borrower, but families can share the responsibility with the student when a creditworthy individual co-signs a private student loan. Some lenders offer some lenders offer the option to defer payments while the student is in school, but interest accrues during this time and is added to the loan's principal amount when the deferment period ends. This process, again, is called interest capitalization. So the best way to think of, and it's actually all three of these, they would all be considered like an unsubsidized loan. So keep that in mind. A federal direct parent plus loan, that's a federal loan for the parent, and the parent is the borrower. Repayment typically begins immediately, but parents may elect to defer payments while the student is in school. But again, interest accrues during this time and is added to the loan's principal amount when the deferment period ends. Again, interest capitalization. And then lastly, there's a private parent loan, and those are private loans where the parent or another creditworthy individual is the borrower. This allows the borrower to help the student achieve their education goals without any additional financial burden for the student. Repayment typically begins immediately, and some lenders offer borrowers the ability to make interest payments while the student's in school. So we just did a high level overview of these programs, but it's important to dig into some of the details to better understand the differences in these loan programs. Students and families should weigh their preferences based on what each product type has to offer when choosing the best financing option to them. So we're going to start with Federal Direct Plus loans. They only offer a fixed interest rate, and that interest rate is currently at 8.05%. And it's one price for all. So it doesn't matter if you have amazing credit or just so so credit, everybody gets that same interest rate. Private loans, in most cases, offer you the choice of a fixed or variable rate. And private loan interest rates are based off of several factors, including credit worthiness. Each lender will look at a borrower a little differently, which may result in different lenders offering different interest rates. Similar to federal direct student loans, there is an origination fee on a federal direct Parent Plus loan, and it's 4.228%. Private student and private parent loans usually have no origination or disbursement fees. One other thing to keep in mind is applying with a cosigner on a private loan may increase the likelihood of being approved. Federal Direct Parent Plus loans require the parent to make payments for the life of the loan, but some lenders on private student loans offer the option to release a cosigner after meeting certain requirements. And I do want to speak to one common misconception is that people often think that they can transfer a Federal Direct Parent Plus loan to the student so that then the student's the legally responsible for that loan. But like I said, that's a common misconception. The Federal Direct Parent Plus loan is a loan in the parent's name, is the parent's responsibility, and there is no mechanism in place to transfer the responsibility to the student. In other words, the loan is legally the parent's responsibility until it's paid in full. And gang, I know you may be saying, wow, he really hit that hard. But gang, I can tell you, again, being a former financial aid administrator, there were times where folks just didn't quite understand that. And I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page there. I'm not saying that Parent Plus loans are a bad thing. I think for some people, they're fantastic. But I just want folks to be fully aware of who's responsible for that loan. Also, I want to talk a little bit about payment flexibility. That's important for a lot of borrowers. So Federal Parent Plus loans are eligible for multiple repayment plans, including standard, graduated, and extended repayment options, federal consolidation, and some public service loan forgiveness options. You will want to go to studentaid.gov for more specific information on those. Private student loans and private parent loan payment options will vary by lender. So we encourage you to contact individual lenders for their specific repayment options. And gang, you can usually just do that on their website. I acknowledge that this is a lot. And I think the best advice I can give is that families should sit down and have the conversation about the cost of college, how it's being paid, and by whom. Having that conversation and level setting those expectations will help tremendously as you explore your options if you need any of these options. If the parents want to shoulder the responsibility, then maybe a private parent or a federal Parent Plus loan is the best option. If the parents want to help but don't want to shoulder the responsibility legally, perhaps a private student loan with a parent co-signing would be the best option. Those conversations will help guide your path moving forward. And we've got another question here in the chat. So when and where to apply for financial aid programs? So I think one thing to keep in mind is that for the vast majority of financial aid programs, especially if we're talking federal programs, that application really is the FAFSA. It's the free application for federal student aid. That's going to unlock the vast majority of financial aid programs. When we start talking about programs beyond that, scholarships are most likely all going to have their own individual application. You may want to check with your state to see if they have any additional aid options that require an additional application, similar with the college or university themselves. And then we had just talked about all of these different loan options. These loan options do require separate applications as well. So hopefully that helps. So I'd like to go in a little more detail about federal direct parent plus loans. So these loans are taken out by the parent. I know I keep banging that drum gang, but I'm going to keep doing it. And these loans are they can cover up to the entire gap, up to 100% of the school certified cost of attendance, minus any other financial aid received. In addition, parents can request deferment of payment while they're in school. A student must complete the FAFSA in order for the parent to take out a PLUS loan. But unlike federal direct student loans, credit history is considered for the federal direct parent PLUS loan. In addition, to qualify for a PLUS loan, you must meet additional requirements if you have an adverse credit history. As previously stated, borrowers are obligated for the life of the loan and cannot be released from the loan. Also previously mentioned, these loans also have an origination fee, so parents may have to borrow additional funds to cover those loan fees. All right. So, a little bit more about private loans. So, a responsible private student or parent loan are also another source of that gap financing. These loans are funded by banks and credit unions, not the federal government. A FAFSA is not required for these loans, and they are credit based. The repayment period and terms are going to vary from lender to lender. So, we again encourage families to do their research to determine which lender and repayment terms best fit their situation. Private loans can cover up to 100% of the school certified cost of attendance minus other aid received. And because most private loans have zero origination fees, you need not borrow extra to cover these fees. Because private loans are credit based, they may require a cosigner, as most students will not meet the minimum credit requirements on their own. Again, a cosigner is someone who would help secure the loan, would only be responsible if the student fails to meet the obligation, and it can be a responsible third party. So it can be a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle. You get the idea. In many cases, lenders offer a cosigner release option after meeting certain requirements. So, gang, boy, whew, it's quarter past the hour. We're at the end of the presentation, but I did want to leave you with some helpful tips to remember when preparing for and conducting your award offer review. So, first, families should carefully review the information in their FAFSA submission summary. So, you'll get that once the FAFSA processes to make sure there are no errors. Students may have to accept or decline their offer with the school, either online or by returning a signed form to the school's financial aid office. Students don't have to accept all types of aid offered in their financial aid offer. The offer typically covers one academic year. Understand the renewal requirements for all scholarships and some grants. Compare the terms, conditions, and details of each offer and aid type, and consider more than just the dollar amount. Compare financial aid offers closely. Be sure to look at both the total amount of aid and the types of aid offered. We recommend using an online tool like a free financial aid offer comparison sheet or a fillable PDF that does the math for you if you prefer. All right, gang, that concludes the formal part of the presentation. I know I answered a lot of questions in throughout, but I'm happy to continue to take questions. If anybody has any additional questions, I'm happy to stick around. I'm going to take a drink of water, a little parched, but I'll hang on in case anyone's typing in a question. All right, so we do have a question. Is there a limit to scholarship money universities allow? So the short answer to that is yes. However, what I will say is oftentimes that limit is the cost of attendance. So keep that in mind. That's why I often say sky's the limit. Like you can't necessarily earn more than that. You can't earn more than that cost of attendance. They are going to cap it at that point. But that if you reach that, that's amazing because what that means is you literally got college for free, and not just college, but all the living expenses, books, and so forth. So the short answer is yes, there is a limit, but that limit's pretty darn high. It's that cost of attendance. So I always tell folks just keep going. Keep going until they tell you you have to stop. And even if you do hit that cap with scholarships, I think that's where you talk to the scholarship organizations and say, hey, can I roll this over to next year? And depending on the organization, they may say yes. So again, I would just continue with the scholarship applications there. So we've got another one here. It's my understanding that you can appeal an offer if you believe that additional information or situation must be considered. What's your experience with this? So the answer to that is absolutely. You can appeal an offer if your situation has changed, and that's what we covered it very early on. It was called a special circumstances application, and schools are required to have a process in place for that. So that's one of those that if your situation has changed, you can definitely fill out that special circumstances application and appeal your financial aid offer to hopefully get additional funds based on your situation. So next question is, if the university drops your financial aid significantly for years 2 and 3 and beyond, what options do you have to appeal since the child is already enrolled? So, really at that point, you're really going to be, and I hate to say it from this perspective, but you're kind of at the mercy of the institution. Not knowing the situation, it's really hard to say what the circumstances are for them reducing the aid. But I mean, it never hurts to reach out to them to appeal, to see what the circumstances were that the aid was dropped, and to see if there's any way to either recover or at least supplement what was lost. But I think again that special circumstances or some type of appeal is always in play with situations like that. Again, as a former aid director, I hated it when we couldn't renew a scholarship or aid was lost or something of that nature. And I know I did my best to try to supplement that. But again, it's really case by case. It kind of depends on the circumstance. But I would encourage you to reach back out to them and see what those circumstances are and if there is a way to hopefully recoup that. So how often do you see that happen? People hitting the cap with scholarships. How hard would that be on average? So, I think again, it really depends on the institution, on the situation, and it depends. It also depends on the student. So I have seen it happen. Is it common? I wouldn't say it was common, but we would have students that would hit that cap, and oftentimes it was a combination. It would be a combination of institutional scholarships, institutional grants, potentially federal grants, but a lot of times a lot of outside scholarships, and that's the key when we start talking about outside scholarships. Scholarships from third party organizations that give those funds to students and families. I could always tell when a student really took that process seriously because we would get, literally 8, 10, 12, or more checks from private organizations for that student. And then it just depended on the dollar amount. So, we had it when I was an aid director, I had it happen a handful of times. And again, it was a really good problem to have. And a lot of times what we would be able to do is we would work with the scholarship organization to essentially have them roll it over for the next year because we never wanted to see students lose free money. That's money that, especially scholarships, that is money they earned, they worked hard for. We don't want to watch that just essentially go away. So yeah, it happens. It definitely happens. So. All right, gang. I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue. I'll give it just a little bit longer. Oh, all right. Oh, Margaret, well, thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate that. Um, And I believe, Sydney, I believe that the presentation they are recording the presentation, so it will be available to view. All right, we have a question. This is more kind of speculation. The rumor said that colleges admit students based on need. Is that true? I would say that that is definitely not true, especially not admitting them. Um, unless, let me rephrase. I can't speak to, you know, highly selective institutions that maybe have access to the CSS profile. Um, but even then, most of the time, those schools will make those admission decisions before the profile is completed. So I would say the vast, vast, vast majority of the time that it's exactly what you said it is. It's a rumor. There's little to no fact backing it up. So I wouldn't buy into it, like I said, especially with the vast, vast majority of schools. So can your scholarships affect the FAFSA? So the answer to that is not really. So in very, very rare cases, I'm talking, gang, I mean, I'm gonna put a really, I mean, we're getting deep into the weeds here. If you receive scholarships, really beyond tuition and fees, that has to be reported as taxable income to the IRS. If it's reported as taxable income to the IRS, then it has to be reported as income on the FAFSA. It then can impact the SAI. Again, we're getting deep into the weeds here, folks. But with that being said, in order for I'm trying to think of what the income protection allowance is for a student. I think it's right about $10,000. So the short answer is if a student receives scholarships in excess of $10,000 more than their tuition and fees, then it could potentially impact any funds coming from the FAFSA. But beyond that, no. I mean, I know that was a really long answer. Sorry, that's what happens when you talk to a financial aid dork. I'm going to give you, I'm going to pull back the curtain. I'm going to give you the answer. And I know, like I said, that was probably way more detailed than you wanted, but that's the answer. Oh my goodness. Anything else, gang? Anything else for me? All right. Well, gang, seeing none. I First and foremost, I want to thank you all for sticking it out with me. Oh my goodness, we are almost at the bottom of the hour. You all were incredibly engaged. This was fantastic. I love answering questions. I love sharing the knowledge I've gained over my career. So I hope this has been helpful. I want to especially extend a thank you to NSHSS for inviting me to do this. Gang, I mean, I'm here because of them. I always appreciate it because it just helps me help more people. So that's me being selfish. I want to help people. They give me this platform. So thank you, NSHSS. Thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight. Thank you to you all who are hopefully watching the recording as well. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it was beneficial. And gang, best of luck as those award offers start rolling in. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. And I believe this concludes our webinar. Have a great one, everyone.